Thanks for doing the interview.
Yeah.
When we talked to Governor DeSantis on the debate stage, asked him about the homeowners insurance crisis. He talked about the problem of litigation, but we didn't really hear an answer from him about what the possible solution might be.
Sure.
This is in your wheelhouse, Jimmy. What do you think some of the answers could be going forward for Florida?
Sure. So I have been an advocate for getting rid of the assignment of benefits since the first day I've been in office. So as we have constantly advocated for eliminating the assignment of benefits, I don't think people really realize what this means is you are assigning your benefits to somebody else. I mean, you are literally giving somebody your rights to your insurance claim. And as people, especially after a storm, you see it. This is why we've been on the TV, as much as we can, advocating for people not to sign anything. What happens is they're in a vulnerable state. Somebody knocks on their door, offers them assistance, and said, well, just sign this form and I'll deal with your insurance company. You have given your claim over to somebody else that gets to set whatever invoice they want, use up whatever value of your insurance proceeds that they see fit. And the next thing you know, you're left with just peanuts to rebuild your life with. So this has been an exploitation. It can be used in noble ways. When you go to the emergency room and an ambulance brings you in, the first thing you sign is assignment of benefits. So the hospital can bill your insurance company for the services rendered. It has been perverted and used in a way where it is running the home insurance market into the ground and out of the state of Florida.
Is there any other thing or idea that you can bring to the table? Because what I heard you talking about is after you've been impacted by a storm. But what about for the rest of us? For instance, on this side of Florida,
Sure.
the storm didn't do much here. Okay?
So the assignment
but we're still going to be paying for it.
Absolutely. So the assignment of benefits is being exploited every day, whether you're in storm season or not. So if you look at how the assignment of benefits, it gets exploited for windshields, but it gets exploited for roofs. You've got a number of players that have gone on the market. It's been exploited for kitchens. They will knock on your door. They will connect to communities through their churches, and they'll say, "Oh, can I do an inspection on your house? I'm a licensed Florida contractor." And I'll tell you, if you want to go look at a case, go review Strems and Citizens Insurance. And you can see the activity where the assignment of benefits was being exploited over 5,000 times in a 7-year period with just one insurance company. We've got a handful of law firms in the state of Florida that are ruining it for everybody else in this state. And you know what? The legislature has not had the appetite to want to make the changes. The governor called for one special session. We moved the needle some, but what has he done? He's called another special session to deal with this exact problem. Again, if we don't deal with the assignment of benefits, I don't know if the governor wants to go as far as one-way attorney's fees. That's another angle, but we have got to correct the problems we have had with a handful of bad firms. And, I really wish the Florida bar would step up and do what they should do. They should police their profession. And if they don't, I recommend that we just take the Florida bar and dissolve it and let licensure of attorneys in the state of Florida be under the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, because at least then we have some enforcement over these guys that are way out of line with their tactics, their actions, and how they're hurting people innocently.
I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Get rid of the bar?
That is an option. If that's what I got to do to get the attention of them policing their profession, I'm good with that. Okay,
Wow.
But look, I'll make something real clear. We have got good insurance companies and we got bad ones. We got good attorneys and we got bad ones. We got good contractors and we got bad ones. We got good public adjusters, we got bad ones. We got good policyholders and you got bad ones. It is what it is, but we've got a correction. And right now, the litigation environment, this is a pretty glaring statistic. 7% of all insurance claims in the whole United States, originate in the state of Florida. Okay? But over 77% of all litigation originates in the state of Florida. The legal system in the state of Florida is broken when it comes to protecting the insurance policyholder.
Could there be a system of checks and balances to make sure that contractors are charging the correct amount if they come in on the heels of a hurricane? Is there anything that can be done to keep those guys in check?
So we've tried to do that legislatively. We said, okay, you know what? You have to give a written estimate. But here's what's happening. The contractors are canvassing the neighborhoods like locusts, all right? And they will get you to sign up, and they're not providing the written estimate. Thank goodness, since they don't provide a written estimate, we've got some wiggle room to reach out to that policyholder and say, what you've signed is not a standing held contract. We can get you out of it. But you think of how much manpower it does. They've got more manpower there because of the incentive they've got to sign you up. And they think that, if you let it to continue that way, then yeah, they get their claim. So again, the estimate is critical. That's a piece that typically the contractors that canvass the neighborhoods aren't fulfilling.
Yeah.
And that usually gives us a lane to get people out of this AOB that they have signed. Again, I can't stress enough. I'll say AOB, I'll say assignment of benefits, but it's more important, it's assigning your benefits away. It's really what you've done. You have given somebody at your doorstep who you've never met a blank check to get money from your insurance carrier.
Is there anything that can be done punitively against insurance companies when...
I'm so glad you asked this.
Okay, well, like for me, right before the start of storm season, I get a little love note that I'm being dropped.
Sure.
Is there anything that you can do to punish them for something like that,
so
that they don't want to do that next storm season?
So what we definitely did already this year, because when a storm hits, a lot of times there's fear that people are going to be canceled or not renewed by their carrier. So we immediately, because of the governor's emergency order, that gives us broad powers to force the carriers to keep your policies intact, in force. So that's what we've done with the end, or we won't let them do business in the state of Florida. They'll get run out of the state. But for the most part, carriers don't want to be adversarial with the state. If we get on them for what they're doing right or wrong, they're responsive. Then this is what we do. This is why we have the Office of Consumer Services in the state. But here, getting back to a prosecuting element that's not being fulfilled. And this is another thing we want to ask the legislature for. At the end of the day, we have our insurance fraud investigators in the state. We have about 300 sworn law enforcement that do insurance fraud. But here at the end of the day, here's the challenge we've got. You've got a state attorney who's elected. Okay, state attorneys, have to go out and campaign for re-election just like other people do that are holding public office. And now they've got only so many hours in the day. They only can prosecute so many cases in a week. And I'm looking at murder or insurance fraud.
Sure.
Who's going to get the time?
Sure.
Okay. So the insurance fraud it's not as sensational. It's just as important, but it's not getting the type of attention it needs. So this is why, and we send money to state attorneys all over the state for dedicated insurance prosecutors. But what they do is they just divert the money because I need more prosecutors to handle crimes that actually physically hurt somebody. And I can understand their priorities. So what we have asked the legislature, we want a dedicated prosecutor. Just we have a statewide prosecutor for cases. Give me a statewide prosecutor to do insurance fraud. Because I tell you, if you create the deterrence out there, they will stop doing the games. They will stop breaking the crimes. And I tell people all the time, when you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And it's time to start showing these guys that they're playing stupid games.
So who would pick who this prosecutor is? Would that be a governor appointed position?
So it just depends. If we're going to ask the legislature for it, we have been engaging the Attorney General's office on this idea. So whether because insurance fraud exists in our silo, if that specific prosecutor needs to exist in the Attorney General's office, so maybe there's a separation of powers, I'm fine with that. But we just need somebody that their sole purpose is to prosecute insurance fraud and teach the bad players out there a lesson.
When Adam Hattersley was in this chair, he says a lot of this is your doing and Governor DeSantis is doing. He says that we find ourselves in this situation because of the policies of the DeSantis administration. What do you say to that?
Look, the legislature has the ability to change the laws. They've got the pencil and the eraser. I advocate. This is no different like I advocated for COVID liability protections. I went and fought all over the state to make sure the legislature passed it. Reluctantly, they did. It was the first bill the governor signed. I think there's an exploitation that was going to exist with COVID liability protections, and people were going to sue and settle businesses and small groups over saying I caught COVID at your business. Whether it be that I fought for a cancer benefit for our firefighters. I can't pass the law, but I can encourage the legislature to do it. Or a PTSD benefit for all first responders. So the legislature has the power to do it. We can advocate and we execute. So, my plea to the legislature is do your job. People are hurting financially. And I think one of the greatest forces for good is home ownership. I think when the people own a home, they show up to work because they got a house note to pay for, but then they get things like a property tax bill. And they start realizing that I've got a community I'm living in and I want to make my community better. And I've got taxes that go somewhere to make my community better. But then when you have insurance rates going up the way they have, it makes the access of home ownership that much tougher. So again, to me, this is an obligation we've got to the citizens of the state of Florida. We will continue to advocate just like we have every single year we've been in office, but we've got to have the legislature step up and do their job.
Are you the auditor-in-chief for the state in this role?
I can be. So we've got the authority to go out and audit any government entity in the state of Florida. It's pretty broad powers if we wanted to go there.
Have you done any of that in your time in office?
So yes and no. Where we have been asked by the legislature starts an investigation, we will engage. Sometimes they say, oh, this has become a criminal investigation, as if we even look to some of the non-for-profits that were misappropriating state funds. So as we start that process, then it becomes a criminal investigation, and then FDLE says, you know what, we'll take it over from here. So a lot of the times it just depends if we discover something or if another law enforcement agency then pursues it, then whoever the lead agency is the one who's going to make those decisions.
Your opponent said to me, well, it makes sense to have this position be from the opposite party. It makes sense for the CFO to be a Democrat if it's a Republican governor and a Republican administration, for the purposes of making sure that these guys are doing what they should do, and you don't want them on the same team necessarily. What do you make of that, Jimmy?
So I serve every citizen in the state of Florida. Actually, I loved it when my opponent said that we should have a Republican CFO. I tend to agree with him. So, there's a way I look at it right now. Checks and balances can be a good thing, but with Jimmy Patronis, I don't care what party you are, I'm going to hold you accountable.
What's the thing that you're most proud of since you've had this position?
One thing that I never realized until I had this job was how important the safety of our communities are. And if you tell people, if you think about it, you're not going to have good quality investments in the state, you're not going to have prosperity, you're not going to have businesses relocate to the state. None of that happens without the safety net that works 24/7, 365. So when I was in West Palm Beach 5 years ago, and I'm turning on TV and I see a local reporter that used to be on local markets down here now. And he is, the volume's turned off on the TV, and I said, oh, there's Andrew. So I turned up the volume, and Andrew is reporting from a retention pond where a 3-year-old girl who was autistic drowned. And then I think about the first responders that showed up and had to break the news to some mom and dad that they're not going to be able to hold their little baby ever again. So you start thinking about the trauma that these first responders go through, and these guys are working 24/7, 365. And so whether it be the PTSD benefit that we fought for, that we got through the legislature, by the way, which was Democratic sponsored bills, but signed by Republican governor, parties can work together. At the end of the day, that legislation is making a difference in our communities. So I'm a big believer that we don't do enough for our first responders. PTSD was a good one. The cancer benefit for our firefighters was a good one, because those men and women work around the clock to ensure that we have prosperity in the state. So if there's something I take a lot of pride in, is what we have done to shore up our first responders and fight for them, because investing in them helps everybody else.
Sure, well said, good answer. A lot of people don't understand all of the things that this role touches. You have oversight of a lot of things. So when you're talking to folks and they say, like, Jimmy, what do you do?
Yeah.
When you go through the list of all of the things that you have jurisdiction over and sort of in your wheelhouse, is there one that they say, I never knew that?
So I tell people the easiest way to describe the CFO's office. I tell guys, I say, I'm the business manager for the state. It is the best job in the entire state government. Look, governor's got a good gig. He's got a plane. He's got a lot of things that are working for him. But you know what? He can't do much about signing the checks. So again, I think the CFO's office, one of the kind of the neat things that are there, and we've seen sometimes on TV, but is unclaimed property. So we're the trustee of all unclaimed property in the state. Last year, we gave out over $330 million of money back to people that lost their money. So, I mean, whenever you don't, deposit your paycheck, or you had a dividend or a benefit of some sort of financial value, or you didn't renew your safety deposit box, all that comes back to us. So, I think it's kind of the cool part of the office, because you get to reunite people with stuff they didn't know they had lost. A good friend of mine in my hometown, I encouraged him to go look at the website. He had $10,000 waiting on him. He didn't realize it. It was a bonus from his employment from years ago. And because it was a bonus, he wasn't expecting it. Mm-hmm. So some of the things that we send through the mail can be transformational. But in addition, I can go on and on. But I tell people in generality, we keep the trains running on time. Workers' compliance. We're the bomb squad for the state. We do all investigations on state arson. We run the state fire college.
The state fire marshal is under your control.
Yeah, and then probably one of the more emotional parts that we have is we coordinate all urban search and rescue response. So whether it be Hurricane Michael in Northwest Florida, whether it be Surfside building collapse in northern Dade County, or it be Hurricane Ian, we coordinate those resources to go from door to door to save lives and making sure they have what they need to do their jobs.
Can I ask you about the hot potato, the migrant flights?
Yeah, of course.
Did you sign those checks?
I did sign those checks.
Talk to me about that.
So again, the legislature appropriates money. The governor sent us over a warrant for a request for us to fulfill a warrant. We go and we check the boxes to make sure that those are accurate, and we sign the checks. So again, this was an appropriated authority by the Florida legislature. And I'd like to remind people that Governor DeSantis wasn't hiding anything, and I don't think the legislature was duped in any way. The governor telegraphed his request for this money and his budget priorities before the legislature even assembled for session. So this was something he asked for early on. This is something that went through the budget vetting process. This is something that was voted on by both Democrats and Republicans. If anybody had a problem with what the governor was asking to do to transport migrants out of the state of Florida, then, they should have done a little more homework and not voted for what they did.
The criticism is that you signed a check for a political stunt.
I don't think it was a political stunt. I signed a check for something that the legislature authorized the appropriations for.
A lot of people say that it was not a prudent use of our money.
I can get that, but I know that these were federal dollars, and at the end of the day, I can spend it whatever way you want in order to make the viewers happy. Again, I think if you've got a problem with how those dollars were spent, that's why there's an elections process, and you've got legislators who appropriate the money. I don't really have a whole lot of jurisdiction saying, I'm not going to sign that because it's politically not the right thing to do. If the legislature signs an appropriation to spend money, then my job is to cut the check based on the circumstances that have been aligned based on that order of that expenditure. So, I hear people's concerns. Did the governor get the attention of an issue that, created a lot of angst? Sure it did. But the northeast part of our United States haven't been challenged with the immigration crisis. The southern part of the United States has. So it was just a way to probably introduce them to some of the expenses and frustrations we have.
Fair enough. But one might say if our CFO was a Democrat, that check wouldn't have been signed.
Then there would have been a lawsuit then. This would have been again a different type of political hot potato. So.
What else do I want to ask you about? What question are we not hitting that you think it's important to be asked here?
I don't think we stress enough the importance of getting to know those people on the ballot. And I look, we'll have, a high voter turnout in the state of Florida, but when a candidate puts their name on the ballot, there's a certain expectation, at least in their own minds, that need to be accessible. So, I take a lot of pride. If you email jimmy.patronis@myfloridacfo.com, it still goes to my phone, and I respond to those emails myself. I totally believe in being accessible, whether it's on Twitter, at Jimmy Patronis, or Instagram. I like being accessible. And look, sometimes, you're going to have tough questions. It is what it is. If you don't want tough questions, don't sign up for the job. So, I think serving the citizens of the state of Florida has been the greatest honor of my life. And I've got a saint for a wife. I got 2 little boys that I get excited when I get to see them when I come home, and they're proud of Dad. So you know what? I know I've got a little bit of a fan section at home, and I enjoy doing what I get to do for the citizens of the state. And every day, all I know is I got to leave it in a better place than I found it. Mm-hmm. And I'm proud. Look, it never happened until I've been on the job, but all 3 major credit rating agencies have given us a AAA bond rating. It's the biggest state in the nation to ever have that type of accolade of credibility. And I take a lot of pride. It started back with Rick Scott. Rick Scott still loves to ride me to make sure I am keeping the state's creditworthiness where it is. I think Governor DeSantis has done an amazing job as he has sent messages back to the legislature, whether it be vetoing $1 billion in 2020 or vetoing $3 billion in 2022. Those are new records of vetoes of sending the legislature, we're going to live within our means. So I take a lot of pride that we have kept Florida in a good fiscal state.
I wonder, when you look at the rest of the country, Jimmy, is the CFO in those states, is that an appointed position, or is that something that appears on their ballots too?
50-50. So state treasurers, state comptrollers, it just depends on the state's constitution. So not every state has this position as elected. Sometimes they're appointed. But if you go back to Florida's history, we used to have a 7-member cabinet. The cabinet in the state of Florida at one time did not have term limits. So you had a very strong cabinet. The governor was limited to 1 term. You had a very weak governor, and the legislature only came up once every 2 years. So again, it's kind of evolved, but I think it's so unique to Florida, and a good thing that the legislature is a part-time legislature. You don't want a full-time legislature. You want these legislators to go to Tallahassee, spend a few days, and then go back and hear the complaints, concerns, or praise over the policies that they're passing. Mm-hmm. I did 8 years in the legislature. I lived it. I worked in my family's restaurant at the same time that I'd go back to Tallahassee. So, I would hear the good and the bad. And that's important when you're making processes that affect every 22 million in this state.
I guess my last question is, when people go to their voting location, right? Mm-hmm. If they're going in person on election day, or if they're going to be voting by mail, early voting, sure, whatever, what do you think is the issue that they should be the most concentrated on and thinking about relative to your office when they vote?
That the financial health of the state is in the best condition that it's ever been in the history of the state of Florida. I take a lot of pride at what we've done in our discipline of how we spend money and how we advocate in the legislative process. And also, people forget this, how our office invests money. So again, it's been a great 5 years. I got to serve a little bit of a Jeff Atwater term, so I've been on the job almost 6 years now. It's been the honor of a lifetime. And if you like the way the state's fiscal health is, then I'm the right guy for the job. And every single year I've been in office, we have done, sometimes big steps, sometimes small steps to drive down the cost of insurance. But it still takes significant action by the legislature. There is going to be a special session here in the next 2 months, and I just plead with your viewers, engage your legislators. Make sure they know you want lower insurance rates, because they can make the environment where we can drive down rates in the state of Florida.